stepfather pressed the signed deed into my hands the night of my grandmother's funeral and said she would have wanted this. My grandmother had just been buried 4 hours ago. Her perfume was still on my coat, and he was already transferring her house, the house she had promised me since I was 7 years old, into my half-brother's name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I set the document down on the kitchen counter, smoothed it flat with my palm, and said I needed some air. Before I tell you exactly how I got that house back and what happened to everyone who helped take it, tell me something in the comments. What is the one thing someone in your family did that you will never forget? I read every single one. I drove back to my apartment in silence. 31 years old, and I was still being managed like a child who needed to be handled carefully, kept calm, given just enough to stay quiet. I am Meredith. I am a licensed estate attorney. I have spent the last 6 years helping other families fight exactly the kind of thing my family just did to me. The irony was not lost on me. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water I didn't drink and thought about my grandmother, Nana June. She was 83 and sharp until the week she died. She called me every Sunday. She asked about my cases. She mailed me articles she cut out of the newspaper because she didn't trust email. She had told me, more than once, with total clarity, that the house on Calloway Street was mine. She had told my mother the same thing. She had told my aunt. She had even told my stepfather directly at Christmas dinner 2 years ago, pointing her fork at him when he tried to suggest she think about the whole family. The whole family, she had said, knows where I stand. So either my grandmother had changed her mind in the last 72 hours of her life while she was on morphine and couldn't hold a conversation, or someone had made that change for her. My stepfather's name is Dale. He married my mother when I was 12. He was fine at first. Quiet, kept to himself, worked in commercial real estate. But over the years, I watched him do what certain men do when they marry into an established family. He learned the architecture of it. He found the fault lines. He figured out who needed what, and he positioned himself as the one person who could provide it. My mother needed someone to manage things. My half-brother Cody needed someone to fund things. And my grandmother, in her last years, needed someone to drive her to appointments and sit with her when she was lonely. Dale was there for all of it. He was so helpful it made my teeth hurt. I opened my laptop and pulled up the county recorder's website. Property transfers are public record. It took me 4 minutes to find it. The deed had been filed that morning. The same morning, we were all at the funeral home finalizing the service. The transfer had been notarized 2 days before she died. 2 days before, when she was barely conscious. The notary's name was Philip Oates. I didn't recognize it. I wrote it down. Then I pulled up the probate filing. There was a will on record, one I had never seen, filed 6 weeks ago, that named Dale as executor and left the Calloway Street property to Cody outright, with a note that the decision reflected a recent change in wishes following a family discussion. A family discussion. My grandmother, alone in her bedroom with a hospice nurse, and my stepfather having a family discussion. I sat very still for a long time. The will I knew about. The one Nana June had shown me herself. The one her original attorney had drafted. Left the house to me, with the remainder of her estate divided equally among her 3 grandchildren. I had seen that document. I had held it. She had shown it to me 2 summers ago and said, "I want you to know where things stand so there are no surprises." Someone had surprised us anyway. My phone rang. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. I knew what the call would sound like. I had been on the receiving end of it my whole life. That particular combination of explanation and apology that is actually neither one, that exists only to make the other person stop asking questions. I answered, "Meredith." Her voice was tired. Raw from crying probably, or performing crying. I had stopped being able to tell the difference. "I know this is hard. I know it's not what you expected." I asked her when the new will had been drawn up. She paused. Dale found someone who could come to the house. Nana was having a clear day. A clear day. On morphine, 6 weeks before her death, someone had driven a notary and a new will to my grandmother's house, and my mother was calling this a clear day. I asked her who the attorney was. She said she didn't remember. I asked her whether she was in the room. She said she had stepped out to make tea. Of course she had. "I know you're upset," she said, "but she had the right to change her mind. It's her house." I told her I wasn't upset. I told her I'd talk to her later. Then I called the one person I trust more than anyone else in a legal emergency. His name is Thomas. He went to law school with me. He specializes in probate litigation, and he is the kind of lawyer who, when I explained what had happened, went completely quiet and then said, "Send me everything you have, all of it, tonight." I sent him the original will. I sent him the new filing. I sent him the deed transfer. I sent him the notary's name. Then I made a separate list of everything I remembered, every conversation, every date, the Christmas dinner where Nana had pointed her fork at Dale, the Sunday phone call 3 weeks before she died when she had asked me to remind her where she put her copy of her will so Dale doesn't get his hands in things while I'm resting. She had said it lightly, like it was a small concern, like she was being a little dramatic. She wasn't being dramatic. Thomas called me back at midnight. He'd done some digging. Philip Oates, the notary on the new will, had been hired by Dale's company 18 months ago as a part-time contractor. The attorney who drafted the new will had no estate law experience. He was a general practice solo who had never handled a probate matter. The will had been executed with 2 witnesses, both of whom were employees at the property management firm Dale ran. Not family, not friends, employees. This is coerced execution at minimum, Thomas said. Possibly outright fraud. If your grandmother was on morphine and in home hospice, capacity is absolutely contestable. And that notary has a conflict of interest that should have disqualified him immediately. I asked him what we needed. He told me the hospice nurse's records, the original attorney's file, and if possible, any witnesses to her stated intentions in the months before her death. I had more than he expected. My grandmother wrote letters, long ones by hand on cream-colored stationery she ordered from a catalog. She wrote to me regularly. I had every letter she had ever sent me going back 15 years, organized by year in a box in my closet. I went to that box at 1:30 in the morning and I sat on the floor of my closet and I read through the most recent ones. In a letter dated 7 months before she died, she wrote about the house. She wrote that it had been in her name since 1971 and that she intended for it to stay in the family on the right side. She wrote my name. She wrote that she had already made the arrangements and that she felt at peace, knowing it was settled. In a letter dated 2 months before she died, she wrote something that made me stop breathing for a second. She wrote, "Dale has been asking me about the house again. I told him it was not his concern. He did not like that answer. I don't like the way things feel right now, Mary. I want you to know that whatever you hear, whatever papers appear, my wishes have not changed. I wrote them down properly. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I read it 3 times. Then I photographed every single page. The hospice agency had records. The nurse who had been with my grandmother in her final weeks was named Claudia, and Thomas reached her through the agency's legal liaison. She remembered the day Dale brought people to the house. She remembered it because she had flagged it internally. She noted in her own records that she had concerns about the patient's ability to meaningfully participate in any legal process that day, and that she had asked Dale whether they should wait. He told her it was a family matter and asked her to give them privacy. She had gone to make tea, just like my mother. Claudia had written it down, though, dated, time-stamped. In the official care log, Thomas filed the will contest on a Thursday. He cited lack of testamentary capacity, undue influence, and notary misconduct. He attached the care records, my grandmother's letters, and a signed statement from her original estate attorney confirming that she had expressed no desire to change her will in any of their communications. Dale's attorney responded within 2 days. They called it a frivolous grievance brought by a disgruntled heir. They said my grandmother was of sound mind and had freely exercised her right to amend her estate plan. They called the letters informal correspondence with no legal standing. I was sitting in Thomas's office when we read the response. Thomas looked up and said, "They think this is a nuisance filing. They think you're going to get tired and go away." I asked him what he thought. He smiled and said, "I think they made this easier than it should have been. Because here is the thing about people who do what Dale did. They are confident. They move fast. They cover their tracks just enough to feel safe, and then they stop. They stop because they expect the person they wrong to do what most people do: grieve, get frustrated, maybe hire one attorney who sends one letter, and then ultimately accept that fighting is too expensive and too exhausting and let it go. They do not account for the person being an estate attorney with 6 years of probate experience and a grandmother who wrote letters. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In those 6 weeks, Thomas deposed Dale, Cody, my mother, and both employees who had served as witnesses on the new will. I was not in the room for any of it. I was the interested party, not the attorney, but Thomas debriefed me after each one. My mother's deposition was the one that mattered most. She didn't mean to help us. She wasn't trying to do the right thing, but my mother has always had the same flaw. She cannot keep her story straight when she's tired and scared, and someone keeps asking the same question in slightly different ways. Thomas was very good at that. She admitted she had been in the house when the notary arrived. She admitted Dale had told her what was happening, and she had agreed to step out, so it didn't look like pressure. She admitted she had seen my grandmother struggling to stay awake during the signing and had mentioned it to Dale afterward, and he had told her not to worry about it. She had traded a front row seat to her mother's exploitation for a kitchen and a comfortable life. She knew it was wrong when it was happening. She did it anyway. I listened to Thomas read me the deposition highlights over the phone that evening, and I felt the same thing I had felt reading the letter on my closet floor, not the hot shock of betrayal, but something colder. Clarity. My mother was not a passive bystander. She was the person who made sure the room was clear. The hearing lasted 2 days. On the second morning, the judge reviewed the evidence, the depositions, the care records, and my grandmother's letters. Dale's attorney argued that handwritten letters had no legal authority. The judge was not moved by this. The letters, combined with the hospice nurse's testimony and the deposition admissions, painted a clear picture of a woman who knew what she wanted, communicated it repeatedly, and was then unable to defend it in the last weeks of her life, when people who should have protected her did not. The judge ruled the new will invalid. She cited lack of capacity and undue influence. The deed transfer was reversed. The Calloway Street property reverted to my grandmother's original estate to be distributed per the original will. She also referred the notary to the state licensing board for investigation. Dale didn't look at me when the ruling was read. He just sat there in his expensive jacket and looked at the table. Cody started to say something to his father, and Dale put a hand up to stop him. My mother was not in the courtroom. Outside on the steps, in the November air with leaves blowing across the plaza, Thomas shook my hand and said we should get coffee. I said yes, but I stood there for a minute first. I looked out at the street and I thought about Nana June, about her letters, about the fact that she had known something was wrong and she had found a way to tell me anyway. She couldn't stop what was happening to her body. She couldn't always be sure who was listening. But she kept writing. Every Sunday, long letters on cream-colored stationery, just in case. She knew I would read them. My mother called me that evening. She said she was sorry, that she had felt pressured, that she had trusted Dale's judgment and hadn't wanted to make things harder. She said she hoped I understood. I told her I understood completely. I understood exactly what had happened and exactly what her role in it had been. I told her I needed time and I would reach out when I was ready. Then I sat with that feeling for a while, the feeling of not performing forgiveness before I had actually arrived at it. It was uncomfortable. It was also, I realized, the first completely honest thing I had done in years of managing how my family saw me. The house on Calloway Street closed to my name 6 weeks later. It needed work. Dale had let a few things slide, but the bones were good. The kitchen still had the wallpaper my grandmother had picked in 1987, pale yellow with tiny sprigs of lavender. Her handwriting was still on the inside of the pantry door, a growth chart she had marked for me and my cousins every Christmas. I sat on the back porch the first evening I had the keys. The yard was overgrown and the fence needed painting and the light was going gold through the old oak tree she had planted the year she moved in. I had spent a long time believing that if I was competent enough, if I was strategic enough, if I handled things correctly, the people who were supposed to protect me would eventually behave like they were supposed to. That belief cost me years of giving the benefit of the doubt to people who used it against me. I don't think that anymore. There's a version of the story where I'm the villain, where I'm the daughter who dragged her grieving family through litigation, who hired lawyers who wouldn't just let it go for the sake of peace. I know that's what Dale tells people. I know that's the version my mother still half believes on the days she needs to. That's okay. I know what the documents say. I know what my grandmother wrote. I know who was in that room and who stepped out and who sent a contractor to the house of a dying woman with a new will and 2 employees as witnesses. And I know what Nana June told me in ink, in her own hand, whatever you hear, whatever papers appear, my wishes have not changed. They didn't change. I made sure of that. If you have ever had to fight for something that was always rightfully yours, drop standing firm in the comments. Share this if you believe a person's real wishes deserve to be honored. People ask me if I feel guilty. If taking my own stepfather to court, sitting across a deposition table from my mother, filing motions against the man who carved the Thanksgiving turkey at my grandmother's house for 19 years, if any of that kept me up at night, honestly, the thing that kept me up at night was the 2 years before any of that happened. The years I spent telling myself that Dale was just difficult, that my mother was just conflict averse, that things would sort themselves out if I gave them enough space and grace and patience, that kept me up. The lost time always costs more than the hard decision. Here is what I have come to understand about the way harm actually works in families. It is almost never dramatic at first. It doesn't announce itself. It looks like helpfulness. It looks like someone making himself useful, driving to appointments, managing the paperwork, being the one who handles things. And the person being harmed, my grandmother, in her last years, doesn't always recognize it as harm because it arrives wrapped in the language of care. What Dale did required patience and planning. He spent years building a position of access. And then, when my grandmother was too sick to resist and the people who loved her were too grief-stricken to pay close attention, he used that position. That is not impulsive cruelty. That is a choice, made deliberately, over time. I say that not to make him sound more frightening, but to make the point that choices compound. Every small decision to ignore what felt wrong. My mother stepping out of the room, the hospice nurse being told it was a family matter, the witnesses being employees rather than people who knew her. Each one of those was a small door that opened to the next one. No single moment was the crime. The crime was the accumulation, which means the protection works the same way. What actually reversed what Dale did wasn't one dramatic moment in a courtroom. It was my grandmother writing letters for 15 years. It was me keeping every single one. It was a nurse who wrote down what she observed because she trusted her own instincts enough to document them. It was small, consistent acts of honesty over time. That is what held. I think about Nana June a lot, about the fact that she knew something was wrong in those final leaks and found a way to tell me anyway. She couldn't stop it from happening, but she didn't stop communicating either. She kept writing. She said what she meant. She left a record because she understood that the truth, documented clearly, is harder to erase than anything else. That is the thing I carry forward from all of this. Not the legal strategy, not the courtroom win, though I am glad for both. What I carry is her example. Say what you mean. Write it down. Don't let people talk you out of what you know to be true. And when someone in your life has been clear about their wishes, consistent over years, and then suddenly changes their mind right when it benefits someone else, that is worth a closer look. The house on Callaway Street is mine now. The wallpaper is still yellow. The oak tree is still standing. And somewhere in a box in my office, there are 15 years of letters from a woman who trusted that I would read them carefully when it mattered. She was right.